All right. Something happened this morning that has not happened in basically 18 years. I'm about to be 36, so basically half of my life has been in adulthood and half has been in childhood. And this morning, when I stepped on the scale, I weighed 160.0 pounds, which is basically what I weighed in high school. And uh, probably like every American, managing my weight has been to some extent an issue and so I've been kind of aiming for this goal for a long time, and failed a lot. And the fact that I saw this morning was kind of cool, and it was like exactly 160.0, which was kind of trivial for me because I like precision and accuracy and all those kinds of things. Anyway, I thought I would give a personal testimony as to my own struggle with weight, what worked for me, what didn't work for me. And this is not a set of instructions. This is a personal testimony. So I'm just telling you a story. And how much of my story helps or encourage or instructs you is really up for debate. Yeah, so the first thing I'll say before you shut off watching is I have a couple things to say that I've heard from others and read other places, and I have a couple things to say that I've never heard anyone say. So maybe I'm bringing something unique to the table, maybe not. And I'm not going to necessarily do these in order, but I'll start with the first two or three that I think people really haven't heard before. So the first thing that I want to say is that I think it's helpful to have a thesis statement. When you go to college and you write a big paper, you have a thesis statement, and sort of every portion of the paper that you write always refers back to the thesis statement. And when you're trying to lose weight, there's generally something that's motivating you. It could be something negative, like I don't want to look this way anymore. It can be something positive, like I want to look like that guy over there. It can be something like, well, someone gave me this plan and I'm going to stick to it because I want to be faithful. You have to have a thesis statement. And I think that in my case, the reason I was overweight is because I was lacking self-control and I was being gluttonous. And to what extent that applies to everybody else, I'm not sure. I have my own guess, but I'll keep it to myself. And I think that those are bad things that we need to eradicate from our lives. And so we need to be careful. I needed to be careful that I didn't replace one bad thing with another. As an example, I could have replaced gluttony with vanity. I could have said, oh, I don't want to be so gluttonous and fat and ugly anymore. I want to be like six pack and I want to be a model and I want the girls to like me. Or you could have replaced gluttony with pride, or you could have said, I don't want to be gluttonous. I want to be, the best looking guy in the college class, or I want to make that other guy next to me feel bad about his weight. And so you can use things that are evil as motivation, and you can get quite far, I think. But you need to be very careful that you don't, in the end, find yourself as a very thin, awful person who's full of pride and vanity. So that's kind of the thesis statement that I think you have to be very careful to construct. Mine came from God's word. It says, do you not know that your bodies are a temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you've given from God? You were bought with a price. You are not your own. Therefore, honor God with your body. And that particular verse is referring to sexual related sins, but the idea of honoring the body that God has given you was sort of my thesis statement over the years. I've heard other people say that they want to be able to walk their daughter down the aisle someday, or they want to hold their grandkids someday. I think those are also fairly noble motivations, but you want to make sure that it's not driven by something which is equally destructive in your life. So that's the first thing. Second thing I want to say is that you are not alone. And specifically what I mean is if you're overweight and struggling with your weight and you look around at thin people, they are probably in the same boat as you are. They are probably also struggling with their weight. I have literally struggled with my weight since I was 19 years old. I got a desk job at Volkswagen. I started sitting around. I started eating a lot. Then at 21, I got married. My lovely wife started making me breakfast, lunch, and dinner all the time, whereas before I had just been kind of like scraps, whatever was lying around, and I started gaining weight. Now, I ranged from 160, like I am today, to about 200. And many of you might look at me when I was 200 and say, oh, you're not overweight, that's fine. Well, regardless of your assessment, 200 at 6 foot tall is overweight. In fact, I think even like 185 is considered overweight according to the body mass index. But here's what I want to say. If you're on a wrestling team and you go to a match and you wrestle 5 guys and you win all 5, matches and you walk away a victor, you've still been wrestling all day. You're still exhausted. Your muscles are still sore, even though you won. And if you're a wrestler and you did the same 5 matches and you lost 5 times, your muscles are sore, even though you lost. And so almost every time I go to a restaurant, every time I go out with a buddy, very, very, very often here at the house, I have to fight to eat the right things and eat the right amount of them. Now, if I'm winning more often than I'm losing, then I remain thin. And people look at me and say, oh, you don't struggle with your weight. That's bullcrap. I do. The difference is I'm wrestling and I'm winning, or someone else is wrestling and they're winning. I'm not trying to make it about me, but I think that there is this big misconception that people who are overweight struggle with gluttony, struggle with self-control, struggle with saying no, struggle with their weight, and people who are thin don't. And I have seen in my own life, not just with me, but others, that that is not true. People who are thin are fighting, just like you, not to eat another cupcake or another cookie. It's just that they're winning more often. And so the question is not, well, why do I have to struggle with this and they don't? The question is, how can I win more often? So I want to get that out of the way. The last thing I want to say that I've never heard anyone say before is a practical thing, and that is, I'm a numbers guy, I'm a former engineer, and I like to track things quantitatively, and so I weighed myself every morning. I think it's pretty important to do it at the same time every day, because once you take on some water weighs 2.2 pounds per liter. I know that as a backpacker, 2.2 pounds is a lot. So you drink a little bit of water and all of a sudden you weigh in, you're gonna feel bad about yourself. So weigh in at the same time every day. But here's the trick. Regardless of what kind of scale you have, you need to weigh yourself like 6 to 10 times and move the scale around the floor a little bit. Here's why. Measurement equipment, and I've worked with some of the best, some of the most expensive in the world in the automotive industry. Measurement equipment has what's called a measurement inaccuracy tolerance. That means if you take an object which is exactly 1 inch and you take a $5,000 piece of measurement equipment and measure it, it's gonna say, and this is just an example, it's gonna say it's 1.01. Then you measure it again, 1.02. Then you measure it again, 0.999. Then you measure it again, 1.04. Even though you're measuring the same object multiple times, it's gonna have some variance because it itself has issues, okay? And your bathroom scale has, depending on which one you have, my bathroom scale has a variance of like 4 to 5 pounds, depending on how I rotate it and what part of the floor it goes on. And even if I don't move it and I just get on 3 or 4 times, I can vary wildly. And so here's the dilemma with that. All of a sudden, you have this massive fluctuation of 3 to 4 to 5 pounds. And that can be really encouraging on some days when you step on, it's like, oh my gosh, I lost 4 pounds compared to yesterday. Or you get on and it's like, oh, I gained 3 pounds. So I found a lot of encouragement and consistency in measuring myself multiple times in the morning, move the scale around the floor a couple times, and then always just take either the maximum number or the minimum number. Don't try and do averages. So I just always took the min. I would basically go 5 to 10 times, take the min for the day and move on. And that was way more accurate and way more encouraging and actually reflected the progress I was making or not making versus erroneously making me feel really crappy about myself because all of a sudden my scale was 4 pounds off. Okay, those are the 3 things I wanted to say that I haven't really heard a lot of other people say, but I have some other things to say, and so if this has interested you so far, then stick around. Okay, next thing I want to talk about is exercise versus activity. When I was 22, my wife and I got gym memberships in Rochester, Michigan, and we started going to the gym and working out because we wanted to get healthier. And what I found is I didn't really enjoy the activities that I was doing, and so I was doing them because I kind of had to, or wanted to, sort of against my will. But then what it did is working out made me feel like I deserved more food. And so then when it came time to eat, I felt justified to eat more than I would have otherwise because I had burned all those calories. And so my muscles needed it and all of that. And what I found is that controlling 2 variables at the same time was difficult. So basically, I personally am convinced that losing weight has to do with how many calories you take in and how many you burn up. And so if you are wanting to lose weight, you need to change one of those 2 things. And I think the more important thing to change is your diet. More on that in a few minutes. And but so if you try and start controlling your diet and diminishing your diet, your caloric intake, but you need to do that the right way. I mean, you can't just stop eating altogether, but you have to stop eating enough that you start, eating away your fat. But then you're also changing your activity level. You're changing 2 variables. And if you know anything about science, you only change one thing from test to test. Otherwise, when the results change, you don't really know what made the difference. So recently, as you may know, I've retired, and I retired in May, and so I've had the last half a year to myself with my family, and we've been getting out a lot more. We've been going kayaking and hiking and rock climbing and mountain biking. And so all of a sudden, even though I'm still trying to control my diet and lose weight, all of a sudden I have all these activities. Now, here's the difference. I really enjoy those activities. I want to do them whether I'm fit or not, whether I'm trying to lose weight or not. Like, I'm just excited to go rock climb, period. Now, when I'm out rock climbing, if I've been eating crappy food, my gut doesn't feel well and I'm bloated. And so I don't rock climb as well. So all of a sudden I'm motivated to eat better, not because I'm trying to lose weight, but because I want to feel fit for this upcoming activity, which I'm excited to do. And then when you do that activity, you feel really kind of invigorated. And when you're invigorated, I feel like, at least for me, I'm less likely to be like mopey dopey, kind of want to sit around and just eat chocolate or something like that. And of course, you're burning calories and you're taking on muscle mass, which then burns more calories just sitting on the couch when you have more muscle. And so the whole thing is kind of a cycle, but I think it's a slightly different cycle than one might realize, because you have the physical cycle, but then you have the psychological cycle. And so I would just say, so one last point. So about activity. So when I was living in Germany for 3 years, my diet there was quite different. And I lost something like 25, 30 pounds while living in Germany, not because I was exercising more, because I wasn't, but simply because I was eating less. And it was through that experience that I became personally convinced you do not need to have activities in your life to lose weight. You can lose weight simply through diet. And the proof of that, this is kind of a crude analogy, but the proof of that is prison. I mean, in some prisons, when people don't get fed, they shrink to nothing and they die. They're not exercising. So it's really all about what you take in and what you burn, and you burn things every time you breathe and think and sleep and everything. So you're always burning. It's really just a question of how much fuel you put in the fuel tank. Okay, so here's what I learned in Germany. For me, it's all about diet. It's not about exercise. But the other thing about Germany that was really big was portions. So we would go to the cafeterias at VW, me and my German friends, and we would, basically kind of go through the line like a lunch lady at school, and she would give us food, and we'd go back to the table. And I was a little bit overweight. I was like 190 at the time. And of course, Americans in Germany have the reputation for being, fat and overweight and no self-control. And I would finish my lunch and I would still be hungry. And I wanted very badly to go back up and get, more food. And there was a social pressure there. I didn't want to sort of reinforce the stigma or the true stereotype that Americans are very overweight and don't have self-control. And so it was actually kind of this positive peer pressure that kept me at the table and kept me from returning to the cafeteria to get more food. Well, what I found was about 20 minutes after I'd finished eating, that feeling that I was still hungry had gone away. I was full. And I think that goes back to something I've heard and read many times, which is that it takes something like 15 to 20 minutes for your stomach to tell your brain, I'm full now, and don't send any more food down here. And what I realized is that you can eat until you're full, or you can eat until you're stuffed. And so if you're eating to the point where you're like, oh, I can't take one more bite, you overate. You ate way more than you needed to. You need to eat until you're full. And that can be hard to identify because in America, we get really big portions. Everything is too much most of the time. And you may not know when to stop when you're full if you're relying on your stomach to tell you when you're stuffed. But you're gonna have to figure that out for yourself. But that was a huge lesson for me. The next one is you need to control what's in your house. So my wife does grocery shopping, and I basically told her just like, don't bring junk into the house. Don't bring ice cream, don't bring chips, don't bring cookies, don't bring junk into the house. And so what will happen is sometimes at night, I will be wanting something tasty to eat and my self-control will be low, and I'll go into the kitchen and I'll look for basically the best tasting thing that I can find. And normally it's not that enticing. Like it might be chocolate chips that she uses for baking, which just doesn't entice me that much. It might be like cheese sticks that my son likes to eat. It might be popcorn that I have to make that I don't really want to do. It might be like a peanut butter that has sugar in it. And so I have the self-control to tell my wife, hey, Michelle, when you go grocery shopping in 3 days, don't buy all this junk. I have the self-control to say that. I don't really have the self-control to not eat that stuff if it's in the house. And so I think you need to be very careful what you bring in your house, because you will have moments of weakness and you will begin to search out the tastiest, most satisfying, gratifying, gluttonous thing you can find. And when that thing, which you will find in your house, just isn't that enticing, you'll find out it's like, I can skip it. Or even if you do eat it, you're eating mozzarella cheese and peanut butter. Like that's not the worst thing to binge on. Okay, let's see. Yeah, I think this is the last thing. So, last thing that I would say that helped me is clothes. So, as I dropped a little bit of weight, I would try and get rid of my bulkiest clothes and leave myself with tighter fitting clothes that I knew would become uncomfortable. I knew it would become uncomfortable if I put weight back on. And so it was like, man, I hate shopping. I hate malls. I hate spending money on clothes. And so sort of that hassle of shopping for clothes plus the financial side of paying for clothes that I used to not need helped keep me a little bit motivated. I mean, it's not the end all be all, but if you start to ditch the clothes that are too big for you and too bulky for you, and just kind of hang on to the tighter fitting clothing that you can now fit into, that's really helpful. I also had like one pair of pants that I really liked. They were really expensive. Somebody had given to me by Fjallraven, and I really couldn't fit into them. And so I kind of just always put them in the closet and kind of kept an eye on it. It was like, hey, someday I'll be able to fit in that. Okay, the other thing I didn't write down, but I want to mention is count the cost. And what I mean by that is, so my wife and I spend about $750 a month on groceries. We shop at Aldi. My wife makes pretty much everything from scratch, and we drink smoothies every morning, which are fairly expensive. But so here's the deal. So we have 5 people in the house eating 3 meals a day, 30 days a month. So if you take $750, I should have done this before, but if you take $750 and you divide it by 5 people, you get the amount of money each person eats per month. Then you divide it by 30 days, that's per day. Then you divide it by 3 meals, that's per meal. And on average, our family spends about like $1.10 or $1.20, I think, something like that. No, maybe it's less than that. I think at one point it was down to like 89 cents or something like that. But you assign a dollar value to the meal that you're eating at the house, okay? And it's gonna be really low. It's gonna be like $1. And what that does for you is that then reminds you when you're in line at Chick-fil-A and you're about to spend $11.50 on something, okay? You have to then tell yourself, I'm spending 10 times the amount of money on today's food and tomorrow's poop than I have to. If I were to go home and if I were to prepare something with fruits and vegetables or rice and beans or potatoes or meat, I mean, we eat meat, cheese. People say eating healthy is expensive. It's total bullcrap. I mean, bananas are about the cheapest thing on earth. Potatoes are super cheap. Rice and beans are super cheap. Even cheese, which is comparably quite a bit more expensive than banana. I mean, there are tons of cheap foods out there that you may be sick of and you might have to prepare, but that's a different argument. That's I'm too lazy to prepare food. That's not a eating healthy is expensive. That's total bullcrap. Now, if you go to Chick-fil-A and you always buy their salads, okay, that's different. But if you start realizing that when you go to fast food, you're gonna spend 10 times the amount of money on today's food and tomorrow's poop, then you have to. That is a huge motivator if you have any financial goals in your life at all. If you're trying to pay off your house, if you're trying to retire early, if you're trying to save for Disney World, whatever, think about spending 10 times the amount that you have to on something. Think about buying a car. Instead of 20 grand, you're gonna spend $200,000? That's absolute lunacy. No one would do that. And yet we do it all the time when we go to restaurants and when we go to fast food places. Now, I still go to those places occasionally. I'm not saying that I'm perfect. I'm just letting you know that when I sit down at a restaurant and I spend $16, I'm thinking to myself, this meal is like 14 times more expensive than if we ate at the house. Is it worth it? Is the quality good enough? Is the atmosphere good enough? Is the service good enough? Was this a good enough event that it's worth spending 14 to 16 times what it would if we were at the house? If not, I'm not motivated to keep doing that. Okay, that was my big rant, almost 20 minutes worth. So, I hope that after this, you know that you're not alone. You know that it's a psychological game, it's a physical game. It's an emotional game. It's a mental game. It affects all these different areas of life. It affects your finances. It affects your health care. It affects your insurance and your deductibles and your HSA if you have one of those like we do. So you're not alone. It's about your diet. It's about the sad American diet. I'm telling you, it's different in Germany. It's different in other places of the world. The culture that we have in the United States is freaking out to get you when it comes to food. So I'm so sorry that you live in this country from that perspective, as I am myself. I wish I lived somewhere else when it came to nutrition. Come on in, baby. So I hope that that was helpful to somebody. Again, this is not instructional. I don't have any special education or anything like that in nutrition, but this is my personal testimony. This is my story. And I hope that helps somebody. If not, give it a thumbs down. Go watch something else on YouTube. And in the meantime, take care.